All right, I guess while the slides are coming up, okay, great. So my job this morning is to try to recap some of the important discussions we had yesterday and highlight some of the lectures that we heard from a really thought-provoking a day. So here, this is not meant to be all-inclusive, just some of the salient points that I jotted down in my notes throughout the day. And the first one is really when we talked about exposures. Not necessarily in terms of toxicants, but also the importance of the exposure when we think about the timing, the dose, and the route of exposure with the microbiota itself. I thought those talks in terms of delivery method were quite interesting, and we can often kind of think about it, how it parallels with important notions related to understanding how toxicants impact us with respect to, again, those same principles, timing and the dose and the route. There was a lot of talk about the metabolic impact of the microbiome. A lot of really excellent examples trying to understand how the microbiome can influence not only drug metabolism, but also toxicant metabolism. Excellent examples with respect to arsenic. Furthermore, not only how the metabolism of these compounds can be affected, but also how host metabolism itself is dramatically influenced by these compounds. And I thought it was a really excellent talk by Dr. Redimbo about how we can target the microbiome to drug it. I thought it was really fascinating and a very interesting area for the future in terms of not only affecting the host but also affecting the microbiome itself. And lastly, but not least, of course, is ultimately understanding how the microbiome influences health and disease. There was a really amazing talk about the variability of the response to different types of nutrition, and really the closing in terms of understanding how the microbiota influence obesity, antibiotic dosing, early on timing, and that sort of thing I thought was pretty remarkable. So through the discussions, I kind of jotted down what I felt were the opportunities, and I think this is a good lead into what today is all about, and that is kind of where do we see this going in the future, and what recommendations or suggestions rather can we make to the community such that this field continues to grow at a really dramatic rate. And so some of the opportunities. And I think this is just another way of saying, how can we fund these opportunities better? Of course, we need to have broader epidemiological studies, and with that, obviously larger cohorts. But importantly, I think one topic that was really touched upon briefly, but one that's really key, is this idea of replication. Do we see the same results from lab to lab and cohort to cohort? Obviously, this is an expensive undertaking, but something that I think needs to be done such that we can really begin to solidify our ideas about what this field is all about. There were some notions or discussion about the exposome, so the cumulative exposure that we face on in our lifetimes. There was great examples related to heavy metal exposure, and I think kind of as we develop our appreciation of what the exposome is all about, I think the two fields will be happily married. One thing I think that doesn't receive a lot of attention, but one that's incredibly important to this, and perhaps again kind of along this idea of where the funding will go, is how do we catalog what these microbial communities are all about? And there's tremendous efforts underway to do this, and one thing that really came up and I thought was somewhat interesting is trying to understand not only the community, but what perhaps they're producing and how these metabolites themselves may be influencing the host. We have a good understanding for how the microbiota influence it, but perhaps other things related to what they're metabolizing could be equally impactful. Last few things, developing new tools and resources, and perhaps even establishing new ways or other ways to support existing tools, things that people are using on a routine basis. There's lots of ways of analyzing, say, 16S ribosomal RNA sequencing data. How are these types of tools funded and supported? And also, we touched on it. I don't think we talked too much about it. But what are the model systems, and in particular, how do we develop new model systems that are appropriate reflection of human health? This is something I think that's challenging, but certainly something that is worthwhile to pursue. One thing I really felt was, is needed, and that was to really foster new interactions between the microbial or the microbiome community and the metabolomics community. So kind of marrying this idea of what the bugs are doing and what kind of what their functional output of their activities are in terms of metabolites. It's something I think that's absolutely necessary and required. And lastly, I think one thing that repeatedly came up and was highlighted is really how do we highlight or assess what the microbiota health or metabolic state actually is. In other words, a comment about how perhaps we can have some kind of readout based on a metabolic tracer or something of that nature to assess the microbial health and or physiological or metabolic state. I think this is something that's really key. So with that in mind, we'll kick off today's session and really try to keep in mind, what are the opportunities, what are the future directions you see for taking this field into the next, I believe it's decade as we think, and really to provide suggestions not only for what we need, but also what we want. My daughter wants a horse, but she doesn't need a horse. So keep that in mind as we talk about things today. So with that, I'll hand it over to the next session. Thank you.